My name is Sarah Qualls. I'm a clinical psychologist. I specialize in work with aging, so it's called a clinical geropsychologist. And I have been working for 37 years since I got my degree and my license.
Perfect. So how did you first become interested in this career?
I was exposed to psychology in high school. I took a psychology class, I loved it, so I took a second semester that had a lot of independent study, and by the end of that I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I started in college as a psychology major. So to be a psychologist, you need a doctoral degree. So it's either a PhD or what's called a doctorate of psychology or a PsyD. One can be a counselor and work in mental health with a master's degree, either become a licensed professional counselor or a licensed clinical social worker. But to be called a psychologist in any state, you need to be licensed as a psychologist, and that requires a doctoral degree. I think probably among all the different things that could be useful, one of the most important is to be able to be self-reflective and self-aware, because a lot of preparation to be a psychologist and even work after you are a psychologist requires you to be aware of yourself and thoughtful about your own feelings and thoughts and actions and motives. You just have to be willing to look at yourself. So psychologists right now, if they're hired on a salaried basis, actually the largest employer of psychologists is the Veterans Affairs health system. And they start psychologists somewhere around 90,000 in 2020. And people move up in their system in particular by having more years and getting more experience. And certainly people sometimes move into management or running a program. Psychologists in private practice bill for the services they provide. They bill an hourly rate. And so someone would have to have a pretty thriving practice to earn 90,000 as a beginner. You have to kind of build your practice a little bit. And then in private practice, I think people mature into working with the clients they want to work with most, and they sometimes become consultants to programs. So in my field, for example, of geropsychology, I might become a consultant to an aging-focused program like, or a nursing home or a training program. So you build your practice by sort of diversifying the range of things that you do. You might add in some research or some teaching, and you don't have to do all just direct service delivery. So I'm actually a professor and I do some practice. So I spend between 45 and 50 hours a week currently, and it's been more at other points in my career. I have part of my time is in the classroom. Part of my time is spending time one-on-one with graduate students, teaching them either how to do research in my lab or teaching them how to do psychotherapy in the clinic. So they have a caseload and they meet with me and I consult with them on each of their cases every week, one-on-one. And then I have my own research and writing time, so I spend theoretically about 40% of my time is research, although it's not quite that, but and then I spend personally about a half day a week seeing clients, staying clinically active. And then part of my professor role is to do service work, serving on committees and helping other faculty build their skill and assisting with junior faculty, that sort of thing. What I love about my job is that every day is so different. And so on one day I might wake up and spend a typical hour on email and then shift over and spend time in a classroom and then come back to my office and spend time meeting one-on-one with students on their research projects and then spend in the day spending an hour writing. On another day I might see clients and on another day I might be spending currently particularly all day on the computer on Zoom, meeting one-on-one with the graduate students, talking about their clients. So every day is different, and that's what I love about being a professor, and that's what some people tell me they love about private practice. They can do that in that setting as well, because one day they're consulting, and another day they're seeing individual clients, and another day they're seeing couples, and another day they're in a nursing home, for example. I've loved the fact that I get to be curious all the time. I guess at heart I'm a bit of a nerd, and I love learning. Every year I learn something different. I am never bored in my job. I also really love being privileged to understand people's lives. I feel very grateful when someone's willing to tell me about their pain and their joy and the challenges of their life. I think that's an amazing thing, to be trusted to share that. So I feel very privileged to spend time, whether it's with a student who's learning to be a therapist and they're needing to look at themselves and pay attention to themselves. So I'm not doing therapy with them, but I'm doing developmental work. Or I'm actually doing psychotherapy with someone who's in a depression or struggling to manage the burdens of caregiving to a spouse with dementia, for example. So I think loving the chance to be curious and to be privileged to enter people's lives are two of the highlights for me. Some of the challenges are that the work's never done. It's hard to ever feel finished. There are certain jobs that you can leave at 4:30 and you're done, or at 5 o'clock and you're finished, and you don't have to think about it. That's not the nature of this work. Students who are in school know what that's like. Once you're into the semester, there's always a project that's hanging that's going to be due in a month, and you could be working on it. Well, that's kind of the life of a professor. There's always work that could be done. There's always another paper you could be writing. There's always another student you could be helping with. And so setting boundaries on work is a challenge for me, and I think for many academics, and really balancing work-life opportunities so that work doesn't fill all of your life. I have loved being able to do this career and have a family. That was obviously a very important thing to me to get. I knew from young childhood, really, that I wanted to have a family. So when I was in graduate school, there were not many women professors, and I was very concerned that I might struggle to be a professor and not have the time to have children. And so I was grateful that I got some good advice when I was in the late stages of my training on my postdoctoral fellowship, that I should look at universities where it was not going to be impossible to blend the two. So I chose to be at a less intensive research university, not what was called a Research 1. And that gave me flexibility. Now the university has changed, and I've always been very research active. I've published many books. I've written lots of papers. So it's not that I didn't want to be active in research. I wanted control. What I learned over time was that being a professor was great, because I could shift around if I didn't want to work from 1 to 4, I could go take care of kids from 1 to 4. If I had a sick kid, I could stay home unless I needed to be in the classroom that day. And I had a lot of flexibility. So it turned out to be a great job. People who are in practice in settings that are 8 to 5, have to do what anybody does with a job to balance work and family. You have to take some of your vacation time if you really need to, and you make trade-offs. What I wrote recently in a little newspaper blurb was, when I think back on my career, and I'm close to the end of it, when I think back on it, I think I am most gratified by watching students go on to be successful. So I now have students who are working with the next generation of students. I now have students that are building their own research careers and being known for work in a particular area. And I just love that. I love that the joy of that. I think universities are really changing a lot. So the professor part of my role is, I think, likely to change. Over the last 30 years, states have essentially dropped their funding from universities so much that they're very tuition driven and very grant driven. So now it's increasingly challenging to be at a university unless you have grant funding. So I think there are going to be maybe people who specialize in teaching at universities and people who specialize in research, and the role may shift a bit where you may not get to do the combination the way I've gotten to do it. Psychologist role, in health service delivery, that role I think also is changing quickly. First of all, psychologists are now recognized as core parts of the healthcare team. And we know now that many, many chronic diseases are at root behavior driven. It's how we eat, how we manage stress, how we sleep, how we move, shapes the diseases that we'll have later in life. So psychology has been really embraced not only for mental health, but for their contributions to physical health. And now as we see social changes happening in our culture and we're trying to figure out how to handle the transitions that we face around increasing the equity for our marginalized populations, psychologists have a lot to say about that. So we'll always have our work and we'll always have our role. I think it'll be interesting to see whether we get a little bit better pay equity within the healthcare professions. We'll see. I don't know how that will work. But I think psychology actually is in a better place now than it was when I entered the field. I tell students all the time that you need to do three things in addition to being a good student. That goes without saying. Learn well, invest yourself there. Separate from that, I think there are three things you need to do. One is you need to go talk to people. Watching a video like this is a way of talking to someone and getting some information. But you also need to talk to people who are doing this work. So that leads me to the second thing, which is you need to get some experience. And you can't get experience as a psychologist, as a student, but you can get experience in human services. Go spend time in different services. Figure out what populations just really touch your heart and draw you in. Pay attention to what kinds of things you don't like to do and what kinds of things you do like to do. We all have, there are a lot of populations I could have worked with. But for me, personally, I realized that children was not going to be my strong suit. In working with older adults, it brings me joy. Even when I'm working with death or disease or dementia or depression, I don't get drugged down by that. But if I'm working with children who are in very difficult family situations, I have trouble with that. Thankfully, other people don't. We all have to find our spot. So you need to go get some human service experience. Do some volunteer work. Figure out what turns your crank. And the third thing I would say is see if you can volunteer in a lab, a research lab. Get some experience understanding how research is conducted, because it will, at a minimum, make you a better reader and consumer of research. But it may also get you excited to realize that you really want to be a scientist in this area, full-time or part-time. It may be what really turns you on. I have colleagues that's what they do. They are full-time scientists, and they are changing the way we think about child development or personality or cognition. So if you get some experience in a lab, you will know if that excites you. And it will also teach you how to think more critically. So those are my three suggestions.